Here is what I told myself the plan was. I told myself it was about winning, about proving something, about taking every single criticism Vanessa had leveled at me during 2 years of dating and one devastating 15-minute breakup conversation, and systematically, methodically dismantling each one. I told myself I was going to become everything she said I could never be: refined, perceptive, emotionally present, connected to a world I had spent years dismissing as irrelevant to the particular kind of man I believed I was, and that when I had done it, when I had built that version of myself with the specific, deliberate intention of making her wrong, I would feel the particular satisfaction of a person who has answered a question no one believed he could answer. That was the plan. That is what I told myself for approximately 3 weeks, right up until the moment I was standing in front of my sister Amy's full-length mirror in a borrowed blouse and a pair of tailored trousers and a silk scarf that had belonged to my late grandmother, looking at a face that was undeniably mine, and that was doing something I had never, in 35 years, seen it do before. And in that moment, with the clarity that arrives only when you have been thoroughly, completely wrong about your own motivations, I understood that the plan had never been about Vanessa at all. It had been about the person in the mirror. It had always been about the person in the mirror. Vanessa had just been the occasion. The door I had needed someone to push open from the outside, because I had not yet found the courage to turn the handle myself. My name is Derek Cole. I am 35 years old. I work in brand communications for a mid-sized company in Atlanta, and for the better part of a decade, I had built an identity with the same precision and the same deliberate intentionality that I brought to building other people's brands for a living. The Derek Cole identity was clean, consistent, and coherent. Confident, capable, emotionally self-sufficient in a way I had always presented as a virtue rather than a defense. I wore dark colors and kept my apartment spare. I had opinions and expressed them without excessive qualification. I did not linger in feelings. I moved through them the way you move through a city you're visiting, noting what was interesting, not stopping long enough to be changed by it. I was, by most external metrics, good at being the man I had decided to be. And I was, by any honest internal accounting, exhausted by it. I just did not know that yet when Vanessa sat down across from me at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening in March and told me she was ending things. Vanessa Mitchell was 32 years old, an interior designer with her own small firm, and the most genuinely perceptive person I had ever been in a relationship with. That perceptiveness was the thing I had loved most about her, and, as our 2 years together accumulated, the thing I had found most uncomfortable. She noticed things I preferred she didn't notice. She asked questions I preferred she didn't ask. And she had, with increasing frequency over the final months, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as patient disappointment, the look of someone who can see exactly what you are and is waiting, without much hope, for you to be willing to see it too. The breakup conversation was, in its way, an act of tremendous honesty. She did not perform it dramatically. She did not cry, at least not initially. She sat across from me with her hands around a mug of tea that had gone cold, and she told me, in the careful, structured way she had of saying true things, that she had spent 2 years trying to reach a part of me that I kept locked and guarded and inaccessible, and that she was tired. Not angry, not bitter. Tired. "You are the most offended person I have ever loved," she said. "And I mean that kindly, Derek. I understand why the defense exists. I just can't keep throwing myself against a wall and calling it intimacy." I said the things people say. That I was present, that I was there, that I had given her what I had. She nodded as if she had expected exactly those responses. And then she said the thing that I carried with me for weeks afterward, the thing that lodged in my chest like a splinter I could not locate precisely enough to remove. She said, "You have never once, in 2 years, let me see who you actually are. And the tragedy of it, Derek, is that I think you are genuinely extraordinary. I think the person you are underneath all that careful management is someone I would have loved very much. But I'm not able to love someone I'm not allowed to meet." I did not know what to say to that. I did not say anything for a long time. She finished her cold tea, put on her coat, and left, and I sat at my kitchen table in the particular emptiness that follows something ending, and I stared at the wall and tried to feel whatever the appropriate feeling was, And instead I felt, primarily, the dull, persistent throb of being described accurately by someone who has decided the description is a reason to leave. The anger came later. It arrived the way my anger always arrived, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly and with a very long fuse. By the time it was fully present, it had already organized itself into something with a shape and a direction. Not anger at Vanessa, or not only that. Anger at myself, which is always the harder kind to manage because it has nowhere comfortable to go. I called my best friend Marcus on a Sunday, 10 days after the breakup. Marcus Webb was 36, a high school basketball coach who had been my closest friend since college, and who had the particular quality of certain long-standing friendships where the person knows you too well for comfortable dishonesty, but cares enough to deploy honesty with some mercy. I told him the broad strokes of what Vanessa had said. He listened without interrupting, which was the sign he was taking it seriously, because Marcus interrupted everything that was not serious. When I finished, he said, "She's not wrong, is she?" It was not a question. "I don't know," I said. "Yes, you do," he said. "You've always known. You just don't do anything about it." A pause. "What are you going to do about it?" And that was where, looking back, the trouble started. Because what I should have said was, "I'm going to reflect on this carefully and perhaps speak to a therapist and do the interior work of a grown man choosing to know himself better." What I said instead was, "I'm going to prove her wrong." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "By what you mean?" "She said I never understood her world," I said. "She said I was rigid and defended and closed off." "Fine. I'll be the opposite. I'll learn every single thing she said I couldn't learn. I was still working it out as I spoke. I'll step into everything I've been dismissing. All of it. The events she invited me to that I skipped, the things she cared about that I never took seriously, the whole world she lived in that I treated like it wasn't relevant to me. I'll walk into every corner of it." Marcus made a sound that contained equal parts skepticism and genuine curiosity. "And what exactly does that look like, practically speaking?" "I'm not completely sure yet," I said. "Are you doing this for her or for you?" "For me," I said, with the certainty of a man who is lying to himself with complete conviction. "Okay," Marcus said, in the tone of a man who did not fully believe me but had decided to watch the experiment unfold. "Let me know how it goes." My sister Amy was the one who gave the plan its actual shape. Amy Cole was 32, a freelance stylist, and the person in my family who had always seen me most clearly with the particular unsparing vision that younger siblings sometimes develop toward older ones who have spent a lifetime performing composure. I told her about the plan when she called me the following weekend, and she listened in silence, and then she said something that changed the direction of everything. She said, "Derek, if you want to understand a world you've been dismissing, you actually have to enter it. Not observe it from the edges. Enter it." That's what I said. I told her. "No," she said. "You said you'd attend events. You said you'd take things more seriously. That's still you watching through a window." A pause, and in the pause I could hear her thinking with that particular intentional quality she had. "If you want to understand something from the inside, you have to actually go inside." "What does that mean, specifically?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment longer. And then she said carefully, "What if you spent some time actually experiencing things the way Vanessa experienced them? Not as Derek Cole, brand communications professional, standing at the edges taking notes. As someone who has set that particular armor down." Another pause. "What if we did a full styling session? Gave you the experience of moving through the world in a completely different presentation? Not as a joke, not as a stunt. As an actual exercise in stepping outside the frame you've built." The silence between us was very specific. Not uncomfortable, but weighted. "You mean I started?" "You know what I mean," she said. I did know what she meant. And the thing that told me I should pay attention to that knowing was the fact that my first reaction was not dismissal. My first reaction, quick, unguarded, before the management system had time to intercept it, was something closer to yes. And then the management system caught up and began its standard objections, and I sat with the conflict for a moment, and then I said, "Fine." Amy said, "I'll call you next Saturday. Bring your willingness to be surprised." In the week before I went to Amy's, I did something I had not expected to do. Really thought, not the productive, forward-facing, problem-solving kind of thinking I was professionally practiced at, but the other kind. The going back kind. The sitting quietly in an apartment in Atlanta at 11 o'clock at night with the television off and the city sounds coming through the window, and following a thread backward through 20 years of being Derek Cole, looking for the moments where the thread had snagged. I found them. They were there, the way things are always there, when you go looking, honestly not hidden, just unexamined. The moment in college when a roommate had walked in on me looking through a fashion magazine I'd picked up, and I had set it down immediately and made a joke, and the joke had become a habit, and the habit had become a wall. The time I'd gone with Vanessa to a vintage clothing market and had stood in front of a rail of silk blouses and felt a pull so specific and so private that I had stepped back from the rail as if it had become hot. The thousand small moments of noticing and immediately unnoticing, of reaching and immediately withdrawing, that had accumulated over a lifetime into the very thing Vanessa had named with such precise, compassionate accuracy. The defense. The careful management. The person I was underneath the person I had decided to be. I drove to Amy's apartment on a Saturday morning in April with the windows down, and the Atlanta spring doing its best work on the city, everything blooming, the air warm and faintly sweet, the kind of morning that makes you feel like the world is interested in your renewal whether you are ready for it or not. Amy's apartment was the kind of place that reflected its occupant completely warm colors and soft textures and the organized, creative clutter of a person who worked with materials and understood them. She had coffee ready. She did not make any speeches or preambles. She handed me a cup and said, "Tell me what you're actually here for." I looked at her. "You know what I'm here for. The styling session. Derek," she said, with the gentle but absolute patience she had always reserved for me. "Tell me what you're actually here for." The coffee was warm in my hands. The morning light was doing something particular through Amy's curtain. And I looked at my sister who knew me, who had always known me, who had watched me perform the Derek Cole identity for her entire adult life with the observant eye of someone waiting for a performance to end, and I said something I had not planned to say, that arrived from somewhere below the level of planning. "I think I've been managing something for a very long time," I said. "And I think I'm tired of managing it. And I think Vanessa saw it and named it, and I hated her for naming it, and now I want to know what it is. I want to look at it. Without the management." Amy nodded slowly. She set down her coffee cup. She said, "That's what I thought." And then she stood up and said, "Come on, let's go to the studio." Amy had a small styling studio in the back of her apartment, a room she used for client work, fitted with a long rack of clothing, a well-lit vanity mirror, and the kind of organized abundance of fabric and color and texture that made you feel, just standing in the doorway of it, like the world was more interesting and more varied than you had been allowing yourself to believe. She went through the process methodically, in the focused professional way she did everything. She did not make it theatrical. She did not make jokes. She treated it with the same seriousness she gave to her actual client work, which meant she treated it seriously enough that I felt something settle in me, a kind of permission that came from her refusal to make this small. I will not walk you through every detail of the hour that followed. What I will tell you is the truth of what it felt like, because the feeling is the story. It felt, from almost the beginning, like a conversation I had not known I was capable of with myself. Every choice of fabric, every adjustment, every small decision in that process was something that I was participating in rather than observing, and the participation required a quality of attention that I had been systematically withholding from myself for years. The quality of noticing what you actually feel in your actual body in response to your actual experience, without immediately redirecting it through the filter of who you have decided you are. Somewhere in the middle of it, I stopped thinking about Vanessa. Not gradually, suddenly, like a radio signal cutting out. One moment she was the entire point of the exercise, the audience for the performance I was constructing, and then she simply was not. She was gone. And in the space where she had been, there was just me, and the room, and the quiet, purposeful process of Amy's hands and the textures beneath my fingers and the light. When Amy stepped back and said, quietly, "Look up," I looked up. And I saw myself. Not the version I usually saw in mirrors, the brisk, assessing, moving on look of a man confirming that everything is in order. A real look. A sustained, honest, nowhere else to be look. And the person looking back at me was Derek Cole. Unmistakably, irreducibly Derek Cole, down to the specific brown of my eyes and the particular set of my jaw, and the face I had been carrying around for 35 years. But the expression on that face, the specific, unmanaged expression that I had not been expecting and had no immediate way to categorize that was new. Or rather, it was old. Older than the management. Older than the performance. Something that had been waiting, with considerably more patience than I deserved, for a moment of honest visibility. I looked at myself for a long time. Long enough for Amy, standing to the side, to go completely quiet in the way she went quiet when she was letting something breathe. I said eventually, "I didn't expect this." "What did you expect?" she asked. "Discomfort," I said. "Awkwardness. The feeling of wearing something that wasn't mine." And instead, I took a breath. "It feels like something that was mine all along," I said. "Something I've been walking past and not picking up." Amy sat down on the edge of the styling chair, crossed her arms, and looked at me with the expression I had seen on her face a handful of times in our lives, the expression that meant she had been waiting for this specific sentence and was relieved to finally hear it. "Derek," she said. "I know." Her voice was very gentle. "I've known for a long time. I was waiting for you to know." "How did you know?" I asked. She smiled. It was the smile that contained 32 years of watching her brother. "Because you lit up around beautiful things your whole life and then immediately pretended you hadn't," she said. "Since you were little, you would look at something, a color, a fabric, a piece of design with your whole face, and then you'd blank it out, like you'd caught yourself and needed to correct it." She paused. "I used to wonder when you'd stop correcting it." I sat down on the stool across from her. The mirror was behind me now, and I was glad of that because I needed to not look at myself while I processed what she had just said. What she had just described. The years of catching and correcting. The decades of the management system intercepting something real and redirecting it into the acceptable channel of the performed identity. "Vanessa saw it too," I said. "She just didn't know exactly what she was seeing." "She saw the effect of it," Amy said. "The defended version. The distance. She felt the wall without knowing what the wall was made of." She looked at me steadily. "The wall wasn't protecting her from you. It was protecting you from you." I sat with that. Outside Amy's window, Atlanta was going about its Saturday morning. Someone somewhere was mowing a lawn. The ordinary world, proceeding. "What do I do with this?" I asked. "Nothing dramatic," Amy said immediately, with the practical energy she brought to everything. "You're not required to make any declarations, or have any big revelations, or rewrite your whole life in an afternoon. This is just information. Something you know now that you didn't let yourself know before. What you do with it is yours to decide, at whatever pace you actually need." She looked at me. "But Derek, stop dismissing it. Whatever it is, whatever it means for you, stop putting it back in the drawer." I called Marcus that evening. He answered on the third ring, slightly out of breath, the sound of a basketball gym fading behind him. I told him, without preamble and in more words than I usually used for things I was uncomfortable with, what had happened at Amy's. What I had felt. What Amy had said. What I had seen in the mirror. I talked for probably 7 minutes straight, which was, for me, the equivalent of a lengthy confession. Marcus listened through all of it. And when I finished, there was a pause, and then he said, "Derek." "Yeah. Do you remember junior year? When you came to that art exhibition with me and Danielle, and you spent like 20 minutes in front of that one piece, the textile installation, the big one with all the layers of silk?" I remembered. Of course I remembered. I had been embarrassed about it afterward, about the length of time I had stood there, about the quality of attention I had given it that Marcus had gently teased me about for weeks. "I wasn't teasing you because it was weird," Marcus said, as if he could read the memory. "I was teasing you because you looked like yourself for the first time in years, and I didn't know how else to respond to it." A pause. "I'm glad, man. I'm genuinely glad." The weeks after Amy's studio were not simple. I want to be honest about that because easy resolutions are satisfying, but they are not true. There was real work in those weeks, the internal kind, the slow, unglamorous work of adjusting your understanding of yourself when the previous understanding has been comfortably in place for a very long time. There were moments of clarity and moments of doubt, and moments where the management system, that old, practiced mechanism of correction and redirection, tried very hard to reassert itself, and I had to consciously, deliberately choose not to let it. I made choices. Small ones at first, in the private space of my own apartment and my own time. I let myself notice things without immediately unnoticing them. Fabrics, colors, textures. The way certain things felt and the way certain aesthetics spoke to something in me that I had always acknowledged in the language of general appreciation. That's beautiful, that's interesting, that's well-designed, without ever being willing to go further and say, this speaks to me. This is mine. I am someone to whom this belongs. That further step, the claiming of it, was the thing that took the most work. It was the thing that the management system had always been most practiced at preventing. Because claiming something meant owning it, and owning it meant being responsible for it in the world, and being responsible for it meant people might see it, and if people saw it, the performance of Derek Cole, the clean, coherent, carefully constructed brand, would have to expand to include something it had never included before. But here's the thing about brands. The thing I knew professionally and had somehow failed to apply personally. The strongest brands are not the most controlled ones. The strongest brands are the most honest ones. The ones that have the courage to show all of what they are, rather than the most comfortable and most defensible portion of it. Authenticity, in branding, is the thing you cannot manufacture. It is the thing that either exists or it doesn't. And the whole of my professional expertise had been built on identifying and articulating authentic identity for other people, while spending 35 years declining to do the same for myself. That irony did not escape me. Amy laughed for a full 30 seconds when I explained it to her. I saw Vanessa once, about 6 weeks after Amy's. It was accidental, a Saturday afternoon in a coffee shop near my neighborhood, the kind of random urban overlap that happens in a city where you lived your life in the same general geography as your past. She was at a corner table with a friend, and I was at the counter ordering, and we saw each other at the same moment. The pause between us was the length of a breath. And then she smiled, a real smile, without complexity in it, the smile of someone who is glad the other person is visibly okay, and I smiled back, and we exchanged the brief, genuine warmth of two people who hurt each other without intending to and have both moved far enough past it to be generous. She said simply, "You look different." I said, "I am different." She looked at me for a moment with those perceptive eyes. And then she said, "Good." And she meant it completely, and I nodded, and we both continued with our respective Saturdays. The whole exchange lasted 45 seconds. No grand reconciliation. No dramatic reckoning. Just two adults recognizing each other with some grace after something real had ended. On the walk home, I noticed that I had not thought about proving anything to her. Not once in those 45 seconds. The plan, the revenge plan, the careful architecture of becoming everything she said I couldn't be, the whole elaborate structure of demonstrating that her assessment had been wrong had collapsed somewhere in the previous 6 weeks, quietly and without ceremony, like a building that was no longer needed and had simply been allowed to go. Not because I had decided to abandon it, because it had been replaced by something that actually mattered, and useful things do not linger after they have been superseded. I had not become Vanessa's perfect girlfriend. I had not proved her wrong. If anything, I had proved her exactly right. She had said there was someone underneath the performance who was extraordinary, and I had spent 6 weeks tentatively, imperfectly, beginning to introduce myself to that someone. That was her legacy, if you wanted to call it that. Not the breakup. Not the criticism. The accuracy of what she had seen and the courage it had taken to name it, even knowing I would not receive it well. I called her that evening. Not to reopen anything. Not with any agenda other than honesty, which had become something I was practicing with slightly more regularity. I said, "I've been thinking about what you said when you left. About the person you thought was underneath everything. I wanted you to know that I think you were right. And I wanted to say thank you for saying it, even though I was terrible at receiving it." She was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "I know I was right. I was just too tired to wait." A pause. "Are you doing okay?" "Yes," I said. And it was true in a way it had not been true for a long time. I'm doing better than okay, actually. I'm doing something I should have been doing for years. What's that? She asked. Learning to meet myself, I said. Properly this time. She said, Good, Derek. That's really good. And she meant that too. What I want to tell you, the thing I have been building toward since the first line of the story, is something about the nature of revenge. About what it actually is when you follow it honestly to its source, when you stop letting it be the easy narrative and start asking what it is really asking for. Every revenge story is actually a pain story. Underneath the plan, underneath the need to prove something, underneath the need to win, or to wound, or to demonstrate capability, there is always just pain. The pain of being seen too clearly and not liking what the seeing revealed. The pain of a relationship that ended because you were not yet ready to be the person it needed you to be. The pain of hearing an accurate description of yourself from someone who loved you and discovering that accurate descriptions feel exactly like accusations when you are not yet ready to be responsible for them. The revenge plan was never about Vanessa. I knew that by the time I stood in Amy's studio. The revenge was always aimed at the part of me that had been letting Vanessa and every person before her who had tried to reach the sealed room walk away empty-handed. The revenge was always aimed at the management system, at the performance, at 35 years of catching and correcting. And the thing you cannot do with revenge is accomplish it gently. The thing about dismantling a wall you've spent your whole life building is that it requires more than anger. It requires honesty. It requires the willingness to stand in front of a mirror in your sister's styling studio and not look away. It requires the willingness to call your best friend and say the true thing in 7 full sentences instead of the comfortable thing in 2. It requires, fundamentally, the willingness to meet yourself, the whole self, including the territories you have been refusing to map, with something more generous than judgment. That is not revenge. That is something with a different name entirely. Something warmer. Something that belongs to you rather than to the person you were trying to prove wrong. I am still in the process of it.
I want to be clear about that.
I have not arrived at any finished version of Derek Cole. The new map is still being drawn, and maps of interior territory take longer than exterior ones because the landscape keeps changing as you walk it. There are still moments when the old management system tries to pull me back behind the wall. There are still moments when the performance feels safer than the reality. I am still learning the difference between the two, and probably will be for a long time. But I am learning. I am, for the first time in longer than I can precisely date, actually looking at the things that move me, at the textures and colors and qualities that speak to the part of me that has been trying to get a word in for 35 years. At the face in Amy's mirror, the one that was mine before I started editing it, that was there waiting patiently under every layer of the performance, that had not gone anywhere while I was busy being someone else. Amy calls me every few weeks. We talk more than we have since we were young. There is a quality to those conversations that I am grateful for. In a way, I am still learning to express the quality of being known, fully and without condition, by someone who has been waiting for you to catch up to their understanding of you. Marcus texts me occasionally. He sent me a photo last month, a picture of that textile installation from junior year, the silk one I stood in front of for 20 minutes. He had found a print of it somewhere. His message said, "Found this. Thought of you. You had the right instinct all along, brother." I saved the photo. I look at it sometimes. It is still, objectively, extraordinarily beautiful. And now I do not pretend it isn't. I let myself look at it the way I looked at it at 21, before the management caught up with me and told me to move on. I let it be beautiful. I let it be mine. Vanessa sent me a brief message about 2 months after our coffee shop encounter. It just said, "Heard through the grapevine that you're doing well. Glad." I wrote back, "Because of you, partly. Thank you for being honest with me even when I made it difficult." She replied with a single word, "Always." I think about that word sometimes. Always. The way it contains both the past and the future in a single syllable. The way she had always seen the thing I could not see yet, and had always been willing to say so, and had always, in the end, wanted me to arrive at it, not for her sake, because by the time I arrived she had already moved on, as she should have, but because the truth of a person is worth wanting them to know. The plan was to become her perfect girlfriend. The plan was revenge. The plan was to build something designed to make someone else wrong. What I actually built was something designed to make myself real. I will take that over the alternative, every single time.